Cameron, come on in, brother.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it, man. My name's Cameron McBeth. I'm an alcoholic. Hello, everybody. This is a trip, man. I know there's like a section in the doctor's opinion where Dr. Silkworth talks about, that we may well have a remedy for thousands, right? And I just always think about like Zoom meetings. I don't attend too many Zoom meetings, but I just always think about that. Like, do you think Bill and Bob ever imagined, a secretary asking someone 3,000 miles to speak at a meeting that's hosted 3,000 miles away? Like, it's such a trip, right? And we've got somebody from the UK here, people from Canada. It's just what a blessed time to be alive in Alcoholics Anonymous. And yeah, so just to kind of give you guys the rundown real briefly, my sobriety date is September 27th, 2020. Eric set me up. He told you guys that I have a good sense of humor, and now I feel like I got to tell jokes and stuff. And so I don't know if I'm going to be able to live up to that expectation or not. What I can say is I am wearing pants. So there's a good, good news. What I can't promise you, I'm actually not wearing shoes or socks. I just think it's not necessary, but I figured probably should put on some pants. I think it's just a funny joke because I got sober during COVID and I definitely wasn't wearing pants for the majority of like quarantine, right? Like, I don't know what it was like having to show up on Zoom because I was just drinking. I was just alone in my apartment drinking. And I know that, the jokes are there, right? We're laughing, but it was not a joke, from March to September. And I think that's the case for just about anybody. But man, COVID did wonders for me. I didn't even know we were being quarantined. I had a girlfriend at the time and I asked her to come over and she's like, "What are you talking about, dude? Like we're quarantines, man." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I was so out of it. I was so clueless. Like that's where my alcoholism brought me, right? And I typically, whether I'm talking for 10 minutes or 15 or 45, this is actually my first, 40-minute plus share. So bear with me. I'm going to try my best to break it up, into a proper segment. But I always mention the fact that I'm from Rockland, California, and the joke I have prepared for that doesn't work because most of you probably don't know where that is. But just imagine like upper middle class white suburbia, and I always lead off with that, and that my parents are still married. They're going to celebrate 35 years in October, and like that's who I am, right? I came from a upper middle class white picket fence, neighborhood with parents that loved me, a sibling who's amazing, right? Who's such a great sister, and I say that on purpose because for about a year of my sobriety, I started hearing more and more horror stories of like what was going on before finding Alcoholics Anonymous, and the prison sentences that I never dealt with, and the DUIs that I never had to experience, and the homelessness that never was part of my story, and the broken homes, which I didn't come from that, right? And I talk about that because maybe somebody on the Zoom might be able to relate to the fact that like that wasn't the case for you. And it talks about it in We Agnostics. It says, if when you want to, you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little to no control over the amount you take, you're probably an alcoholic. And I can tell you what, doesn't matter where I come from, that's me. I check off both those boxes, right? And so, there's people dying in the multi-million dollar homes up in the hills of whatever town you're from, just as much as there's people dying in the streets of the metropolitan in your area, right? Alcoholism does not discriminate. It's an evil, insidious disease. It really is. It's terrible. Just thinking back, like I've been emotional lately, and I can't even describe it really. It's just God is like so prevalent in my life. It's just incredible. It's so apparent. Like I'm over here, Mary's reading the section, and I think it's there as a solution. But it talks about we've found a way out. That's the name of my home group, a way out men's group. It's named after that section in the big book, and it talks about brotherly and harmonious action. And what I've come to realize, in my life here in Alcoholics Anonymous, approaching 4.5-ish, 5 years coming up in September, that's what we do. We lock arms and we put in the work. And man, isn't it just a weird concept for an alcoholic like me who just wanted to play video games during COVID, like now wants to go out and speak at rehabs, and like help dudes try and get sober, just to try and find a lick of what I have, right? What I've been gifted. It's not even mine, really. And so it's just I attribute it to Alcoholics Anonymous. I really actually attribute it to God. It's the grace of God, more than anything, right? If it weren't for God, there would be no Alcoholics Anonymous. He's given us a way out by someone who was real fired up about his story and the fact that he wasn't drinking 90 years ago, roughly, right? It's just what a sweet deal. And so, yeah, so like I said, grew up in Rockland, California. My parents are amazing people. Neither of them are alcoholic. My dad maybe is a hard drinker. I don't know. I don't think so, because he can kind of take it or leave it. My mom gave him an ultimatum back when I was roughly 15 years old. And I'll share a little bit about my personal story, not too much. I don't want to, break their anonymity on accident, but um, ultimately it was just a rough time in the McBeth household. It really was. I mean, the financial crisis of 08 and 09 was going on. I was a knucklehead, right? Like at 15 years old, just causing all sorts of drama. My dad's mom had just passed away, and so my dad he was kind of using alcohol as like a solution at the time, right? Was drinking pretty heavily, and my mom told him, "You need to go to rehab, or not rehab. You need to go to therapy and quit drinking, otherwise we're done." And he was able to stop drinking. I personally cannot relate to that, right? And so I don't know what that's like. I wish. That sounds great, right? And he drinks occasionally now. I know for a fact that if I were to pick up a drink of alcohol today, that like it's just, I don't know how long it's going to take necessarily, because I'm a pretty young cat, but it's, the wheels will fall off, and it'll probably happen relatively quickly, right? And that's the difference between a hard drinker and alcoholic right there, is like once I pick up that drink, it's the phenomenon of craving, and it kicks in, and I have, like it says, little to no control over the amount I take, and then also, like, there's this other section of the disease that the book talks about, this mental obsession. And that's a weird concept too, because like every time I'm not drinking, I'm like thinking about different ways of drinking. Holy smokes, man! If that were the only thing about, if that described alcoholism, the phenomenon of craving and a mental obsession, I'm screwed. We're all screwed. We're not even here. There's no hope. But thank God, there's this third aspect to this disease, which I'll get into in a bit. But a lot of times, what I'll talk about with with my shares is just going back in time to like before I even drank. What was that like? Again, I had a great childhood. I played football growing up at a young age, played baseball all the way up until college, and then started having some arm problems and transitioned into, golf, and played a little bit of golf in college as well, and got really good grades. But there's a couple stories that I like to share, and it's just a weird deal. I randomly, when I was at a meeting, I remembered this thought, or this moment in my life. I must have been like 4. And my dad was a musician, very good drummer, opened up for bands like Toad the Wet Sprocket and Red Hot Chili Peppers back in like college and the 90s. And I remember this show, and there's like some type of raffle going on. And there was like, I don't know if you guys know Pokemon, but there was like this Charizard toy in the raffle, and I didn't win it. And I was like really upset, like crying hysterically, like making a scene in this crowd of hundreds of people. And this older kid came and like gave me the toy. Right. And it's just like, man, I was manipulating before I even like could form conscious thoughts that like turned into memories. Like it just like, it came to me literally like a week ago. And it's just like, man, that's who I was. I didn't have, nobody had to teach me that. That was just me naturally, like born, right? Like I'm using people, places, and things from a very young age to feel okay on the inside, right? There's a couple other stories that I'll share before I ever got drunk. It's right around the same time, like 6, 7, 8 years old, somewhere in there. I had this like high school crush, and I'm not going to use her name, just because I used my last name. And anyways, yeah, she was the bee's knees, or whatever you want to call it. Like she was awesome, right? She was definitely the one that everybody was sought after in like first grade, right? Just to put things in perspective, we're like 6, all right. And I'm sitting there like, man, like if I just like died on the playground, like she'd probably like me, she'd be forced to, right? And so like it's just wild to me that at 6 years old, I'm imagining dying on the playground, looking up, and everybody's like, "Oh, poor Cameron! Like I should have been his girlfriend," And it's just like, what is that, right? That's not normal. Again, using people, places, and things to feel okay on the inside, right? And then the last story that I like to share, I'm at a 49er game. For those that are not football fans, I'll kind of set the stage a little bit. It's a really big day. So Jerry Rice, he's probably the best football player, or at least wide receiver ever to live. He's being traded to the Raiders, and there's this like big old inauguration. And then there's this other receiver called Terrell Owens, very good football player as well, who caught 20 passes, which is a historical day. Like that hasn't been done since. He caught 20 passes in one day or one game, and I'm so upset that I did not get a churro. That I have my head in my lap for like a quarter and a half of the game because I want my dad to understand like that I'm just not okay. Like, and I end up getting the churro, like, hold your breath, right? But it's just so funny. Like over here, I want to die. And over here, it's not enough, right? I cannot be just right here, right now. I have the hardest time existing right here, right now. And this is at 7. This is at 4. Like, I haven't even found alcohol yet, right? Like, this is well before I ever drank. I don't understand that, right? I don't know any of this. In fact, I really don't even know this when I'm going through the steps and doing a 4-step. This gets revealed to me as I'm doing 5th steps with other guys, where I'm like, whoa, dude, like, wow, or when I listen to my sponsored chair who just celebrated 21 years on the 2nd of last month. His sponsor celebrated 30 years. June was a really cool month. There's a lot going on in Alcoholics Anonymous at that way out group on Monday night, and yeah, it's just cool to be able to follow people leading the way, right? And so I just think back a lot on those days, and like it makes a lot of sense why I drank because I was just so horribly uncomfortable. Like I just was, it felt like everybody else had something figured out. Like everybody was watching the TV show and knew like the lingo, and I'm just trying to fit in, right? And so fast forward to 14 years old, me and my buddy planned this night to sneak out, and we go to some apartment of some person who's like way older that we should not have been at, and there's booze there, and there's other forms of alcohol, and like I can't remember the section in the book, but like I had arrived. Like that day, that night solved my problem. I've got a friend of mine. I go to another men's meeting on Saturday mornings. I'm there every Saturday morning, unless I'm sick or tired. I'm of service to that meeting as well. And he always jokes, I was never a problem drinker. Alcohol solved my problem. I was an answer drinker. That's how I drank, right? And it made perfect sense. It made perfect sense to me when he said that, because I'm firmly convinced that the phenomenon of craving kicked on day one, and I was off to the races. Like there was no buildup for me personally. And I don't know if that's always the case for everybody that comes into these rooms, but man, I was seeking that, whatever it was, from that day forth. And, in high school, it's not as easy to do that. I'm stealing alcohol from my parents. I'm stealing it from the different convenience stores that have a no chase policy because I think I'm smart. And I get to college eventually, and it becomes a little bit easier to get booze then. I'm able to drink a little bit more the way I wanted to drink. Somehow my freshman year of college, I was able to, almost graduate or finish that year with a 4.0. I had, I think, 1B or something like that. And then, I go into my sophomore year, I move off campus, and really not all that much changed. Like I just moved from the dorms to like a mile and a half off campus. And fast forward 10 months, my mom's, driving from work in Sacramento to Reno, California, which is about 2 hours to pick me up and 5150 me in a mental hospital. And, I was threatening suicide, all sorts of stuff. Just, it was really ugly, right? What was going on in my brain was not pretty. And this was me like drinking, right? So I had found my solution, and by 19, my solution had stopped working to some extent. And so, you continue on. I go through this rehabilitation type program. It was some type of outpatient. It wasn't specific for alcoholism and drug addiction. It was, mental, illness and all sorts of stuff, right? They hopped me up on some type of, pill. I can't even remember what it was. And by the end of the 4 weeks, my psychiatrist was like, yeah, dude, you don't need these pills. Like, you're fine. I was like, I know I am. Like, those people were crazy. Like, I think I'm pretty okay, right? And I leave thinking, okay, sweet. If I just stop drinking, everything's gonna be okay. But the problem was like that didn't work. I didn't stop drinking, right? And it was almost like I just didn't even remember what I had promised myself. Like I didn't even remember the fact that I had to be pulled out of college and driven to a mental institution because I was literally drinking too much, right? Like that was what was going on. I wasn't honest with people about it, but I knew internally that that was happening. And so from 19 years old, that's when I started trying to get sober. I didn't get into the rooms Alcoholics Anonymous until I was 27. And I'm not going to bore you with the details on that journey because we all know what it looks like. It's just not fun, right? Well, I mean, there were times that were, but it just got worse. And the periods when things were okay got shorter and shorter because there were like tiny little stints of sobriety. There were, like I said, other forms of alcohol involved. Um, but something happened. I remember in 2019, I had a very successful career in my business. I'm in sales. Me and Eric can kind of relate a little bit on that level. I was a young kid in 2019. I was 25 years old, I think, 26. Yeah, best year of my career. And something happened. I remember, I drive to like in-home appointments for like home improvement type sales for solar for those who, are familiar. And I would, drive a couple hundred miles a day most days. And there were these days where like I would just be playing this tape in my head of like, am I really going to do this every single day for the rest of my life just to put food on the table to be able to like eat and live? And not sober, but relatively sober, relatively okay. That like light at the end of the tunnel just got really, really dim and pretty much went out. And I turned the corner in January and I find, I remember that I can drink and I can forget about these things. And so I go hard in the paint. I'm drinking around the clock. It was just like a light switch turned on. It went from like relatively managing my drinking to an extent, like maybe a couple times, a week and not drinking too much to like I couldn't stop drinking and I couldn't go to work. I would turn away work. I would be, just locked in my apartment for days on end. People didn't know where I was. I had my roommate break into my apartment on several occasions, just making sure I'm alive. Not my roommate, excuse me, one of my best friends. My girlfriend couldn't get a hold of me. My parents couldn't get a hold of me. My best friend couldn't get a hold of me. My work couldn't get a hold of me. It was just dark. It was just really ugly, evil, insidious, like I said. And I remember having this thought in that time frame, probably sometime around June. And the thought was like, what if I died? And my thought went to utter blackness, separation from God, separation from everybody that I love and that loves me, and like knowing it. And it was terrifying. And what's funny is like that didn't get me sober. That's how powerful the phenomenon of craving and the mental obsession is. And so you fast forward a few months. I really can't explain what happened. I know a lot of people will talk about the God help me prayer. That's not what happened for me. I had someone move into my apartment. We rearranged the furniture. He was really hopped up on Adderall. Sorry if I don't mean to cross lines here, but he's not an alcoholic. He was an entrepreneur. He was very money motivated and just like was moving with purpose, right? And I got attracted to that. And so I started following him around in a way, and I started getting excited about like my business again. And it just got really weird for the last 3 months. I lost a lot of weight. I didn't look very good at all. I was probably about 160 pounds, maybe 170. I'm about 230 now, just to put that into perspective of like how bad I looked at that moment. Um, and I had a purpose again. I had somewhere to go, right? I had a vision. And I remember I had this night and it was very similar. It's just so weird, like doing my first 45-minute share on Zoom because I had recruited a team to do this, sales blitz, if you want to call it that, where we're gonna go sell a bunch of solar. And they were from all over the country, and we're on this Zoom, and I introduced them to the CEO and our top earner and all this stuff. And everybody's coming to Vegas. We're about to go to Vegas. And I just remember having this moment of clarity where God stepped in and like decided to have a moment and a thought with Cameron that was not from me normally. And I was just like, holy smokes, man. If I'm ever going to be successful in business, I have to get sober. If I'm ever going to be a good father to future children, I have to be sober. If I'm ever going to be a good husband, a future wife, I have to be sober. And it was just like this. I just knew it. I knew there was no chance. I had to get rid of everything. And I didn't know what that looked like. And it terrified me. And so, that was about a week before I got sober. I ended up going to Vegas, making an absolute fool of myself in front of 300 plus people at this business conference with my CEO, cutting him off while he's like presenting to people. It was really bad. And I didn't really know what was going on. And I only say this, I only share this story because I think it's so crucial to understand that I did not check myself into rehab. I did not get myself sober. God politely, my sponsor talks about politely just like guiding the hand of God, just guiding me towards you guys. I think he was more like politely shoving me into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like that was what was happening for me, right? Because I get a text message from the guy who's responsible for booking the appointments on my calendar, which is how I make money. I don't make money unless if I'm in a home selling solar. He's like, you're not going to these appointments until you get sober, dude. You were a wreck. You were an absolute mess. You embarrassed the entire company. You embarrassed Dave. You were cutting him off. And I got a picture of who I actually was for a second. And he told me I needed to go to rehab. And I was like, okay, like I didn't have a choice. Right. And so, I made a phone call. Ironically enough, someone who was looking into selling solar with me at the time was actually in rehab and is like a good buddy of mine. And he plugged me in with a location up here in Sacramento called New Dawn. And, oddly enough, I did not go into rehab. I went into an outpatient treatment facility, and they, talk about your feelings and coping with your inner child and all this, fun stuff that I don't really understand all that much. Right. I got introduced to the concept of alcoholism, and they shared us some videos, and they even brought in people from, different walks of life, like different, psychiatrists and counselors and whatnot. And I just knew I wanted to get sober. And so the whole time I'm fighting the idea of going to a meeting. Like, I don't want to go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I don't want to sit in a circle with a bunch of dudes who are like older, who are complaining about their lives, smoking cigarettes. Like, that's what I pictured Alcoholics Anonymous was, because I didn't know any better, And again, just like politely being shoved towards you guys, I sit down with my counselor and she just tells me, hey, Cameron, like, your insurance is running up next week, and I'm not letting you out of here until you go to a meeting. And if you don't go to a meeting, it's on your dime. And I didn't have any money at the time. And what's really funny is I didn't realize it until literally probably 6 months ago. Like, I did have a choice. I could have just been like, peace, yo, like, I'm out of here. But like, for whatever reason, I just said, okay. And so I show up to that meeting on a Thursday night. I'm 16 days sober and I'm 15 minutes late, like a really solid newcomer. And I hear this story from this, older gentleman who's about to be celebrating 16 years of sobriety. And he shares all of this wreckage that I had no experience with, prison sentences and all this other stuff, right? And he was standing there sober, about to celebrate 16 years, and I believed him. And I was like, that's crazy. There's no way. Like, I don't understand that. And so I walked up to him after that meeting, and I felt the presence of God in that meeting. And I was just like, hey man, like, I don't even think I'm an alcoholic. Like, but I know I've got problems. And he just said something real simple. He said, give it a year and see how you feel. And again, I just said, okay. I've used that word 3 times so far in the last 5 minutes. And I just want to like highlight the importance of that word, okay. That's what I do to the most part. I'm not perfect. I have definitely not said okay. Right. But my sponsor says, knucklehead, like, get in the car, stop talking. We're just going to go help these people. That's literally Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll go into a little bit more detail of what that looks like for me over the next 15 minutes. But the point is, I just try and say, okay, that's all it is. Right. And so I mentioned the third aspect of this disease. Right. And so that was on a Thursday night. I'm walking out of the meeting. This girl comes up to me. I always talk about how I show up to the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous by coming to that meeting. And then Alcoholics Anonymous showed up to me in the form of a woman. And she asked me how long had I been sober and if I had a sponsor. And I've never driven cars. I'm not into NASCAR. I have no idea what she's talking about. Right. And I said, no, I don't have one of those. And she said, okay, call this guy, ask him to be your sponsor. Again, I said, okay. I actually made the phone call and he plugged me in with a sponsor. And I ended up going into the book with this stranger on a Sunday afternoon in a random park. Like, never met this dude in my entire life. Never seen him before. It's just weird, right? It's just bizarre, but I was so sold at this point. Like, I know this isn't the case for everybody, but when I went to that first meeting, everything changed for me. I was like, holy smokes, this is not what I thought it was. And for whatever reason, God kind of just guided me towards the people that are taking that brotherly and harmonious action. And that's the crowd that I hung around from the very get-go, from the very first meeting. And those are the people I hang out with today. It's not always the case in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's okay, right? We're just a bunch of knuckleheads trying to figure this thing out anyways, right? And so I get into that book. I do that first step. I do that second step. I do that third step. I came in with the conception of God. I grew up, Lutheran. I asked my mom if I could get baptized at 13 years old. I got baptized at 14 in a Lutheran church, and then I went to youth group, and that's how I discovered drugs and alcohol, believe it or not. And so, my Christian walk ended up taking a different type of spiritual walk, but here we are, right? And so the third step was not a problem for me. In fact, what's funny is the first step is the one that's the hardest for me. I always forget that I'm powerless over alcohol. And today it looks a little different. It's not just alcohol. It's the fact that I'm powerless over my own self. I'm powerless over my thinking, right? That section that was read in There Is a Solution, the conversation with Ebby Thatcher and Carl Jung, where it talks about ideas, attitudes, and emotions. My grandsponsor jokes about like your thinking needs to be completely rearranged, right? Changed with a new set of conceptions and motives. That's my problem. It's my thinking. From day one, from before I ever picked up a drink, I've been, like I said, using people, places, and things to make myself feel okay on the inside. I've been taking, using. It's just, I'm just a sick person. Or as the preamble says, or not a preamble, but the foreword, a very sick person. I suffer from this spiritual malady, and it lays it out very clearly on page 62. I'm selfish and self-centered, full of 100 forms of fear, which just means I'm scared of literally everything. Right? And I step on the toes of my fellows and they retaliate seemingly without provocation because I don't think I step on their toes to begin with. Right? And then all of a sudden a resentment builds up and I'm like, screw that guy. Right? Or I just pity my own situation. Right? It's one or the other. I can't exist. Like I said, I'm either here or here. I either think I'm less than you or I'm more than you. I'm never looking people eye to eye normally. That's not how I'm just not wired that way. And so what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has shown me is, guys, for those who are brand new or like kind of new on this journey, if you are, like, I hate to break it to you, this is not a self-help program. We're not Tony Robbins. This is a self-abandonment program. Okay? Look at each step. Each step has some level of ego diminishing process going on. I'm powerless over alcohol. That's pretty ego diminishing. Came to believe in power greater than myself that could restore us to sanity, which means I'm insane. That's ego diminishing. Made a decision to turn a will in my life over the care of God that I don't understand, right? That's ego diminishing. And then I have to go and do a moral and, a moral inventory of myself, like fearless. When you take an honest look at who you are as a person and you lay that stuff out, it becomes pretty darn apparent that even the resentments that I had on those first 3 columns, I was involved in every single one of them. And I figured it out pretty quickly. When I started doing my resentments on that list, it was very crystal clear that I was the problem. Like, I was like, I get it. Right. And then I have to go share that with another man. That's ego diminishing, man. I don't want to talk about my deepest, darkest secrets. It took me 2 weeks to share the one thing that I was going to leave off my list, that I did leave off my list. I didn't want to talk about it. And then I have to pray for an hour to make sure I didn't miss anything. And I'm an alcoholic, right? I'm doing this with a pretty foggy brain. It took a while, but some things were revealed to me along the way. And, then I go to step 6 and step 7. And step 6 is, were we entirely ready to, entirely ready to have all these defects of character removed, right? I didn't understand that. Guys, I'm a Christian. I know not everybody on this call is a Christian, and I hate to offend people, but I do share my faith, right? That's what Jesus died for. He died for my sins. He died for my character defects. He took all of that. He bore it for me so I can go off and live a righteous life, not my own, his. The righteousness he accredited to me, right? And I don't get this. I don't understand what's going on. I don't think it's possible that he can actually remove my character defects. But was I willing to believe? And I will say that I was, even though I didn't understand it. And so I made a step 7, and then I went off and I started making amends. The list was already created for me. In fact, I actually had to add people to the list because there were people that I harmed that had no resentment in connection to the harms, right? And that's just the type of person, that's how I roll, right? I'm just harming everybody. And so I go out and make these amends, and life starts to get pretty good pretty quickly too. And I start sponsoring guys, right? I start teaching them this stuff. And that's what's so cool about this program. I do want to touch on steps 10 and 11 in a little bit more detail, and steps 12 if possible with the 9 minutes that I have left. But yeah, I mean, step 10 is crucial. It took me a while to really do a thorough 10th step. I've had 3 sponsors. One of them unsponsored me because he was not fit mentally to be sponsoring people. I went and sought another sponsor. He took me through the steps a second time. He drank at 8 years sober, and we don't know if he's sober right now or not. He's been kind of bouncing back and forth. And so I found another sponsor, and I've been working with him ever since. And that was about January of 2022, December-ish, maybe, of 2021. I can't totally remember, but we've been side by side since then. And, I've had to do 10 steps with that man. And I love this man to death. We have a lot of common interests. We both love the 49ers. We can talk about, baseball together. His sons, are all, athletes, and he's just a funny dude. And what's hilarious is I'm just absolutely terrified of this man because he's a powerhouse in Alcoholics Anonymous. He does the deal, right? He is in the rehabs. He's sponsoring dudes. And a lot of times I feel like I'm just like falling short, right? Like I'm just not doing enough around here. And, let me just give you guys a little bit of grace. If you ever feel that way, just know that like we all are not doing enough around here. Nobody's doing enough. That's not to condemn anybody. It's just the fact that there's a lot of work to be done around here. And that's okay. That means there's a lot of opportunity for us to grow. Because again, I'm selfish. I'm self-centered. I'm full of fear. AA is a simple math problem, people. Sorry to preach. I don't mean to sound like a preacher here because I'm not. But it's a simple math problem, at least for me. If I'm selfless, the simple solution is to learn, or selfish, excuse me, the simple solution is to be selfless. The problem is I don't know how to do that naturally. I need God in my life, and I have to see God working in my life in order to understand that, holy smokes, like I have to share this with other people. I should be dead. We all should be. If you're in a room of Alcoholics Anonymous, you didn't show up here on a winning streak. I don't think, right? Unless you're taking notes for a class or something. But the point is, like, this is a miracle. And so the problem is I still cause wreckage. I still do things that I should not do. I am not a perfect individual. I still don't pray when I know I should be praying. I still react to people who treat me poorly. I do not pause when I'm agitated, often, right? And so I have to do these 10 steps, and I have to be thorough, and I have to remind myself, holy smokes, like I don't have the luxury of the dubious luxury of other men. Like some people can live off resentment. I can't, right? Some people can treat others with contempt. I can't. I don't have that luxury because it eats me up inside, and it wants me on the couch away from you guys thinking. It's the most dangerous place an alcoholic can be, sober, alone, thinking for an extended period of time. And I've been there. I've been on that couch a lot in sobriety. And what I can say is I don't know what's going on. I had the biggest amends that I'm making, I get very vulnerable with this is, and I'm excited to hear if I ever get recorded again in the future, what it's going to sound like. But I'm in a major hole, financially speaking. I made a lot of really bad mistakes in early sobriety and prior to getting sober in regards to not paying the IRS, taking out loans that I shouldn't have taken out, spending money that I shouldn't have been spending. Like I was making really, really good money and spending more of it. And I'm paying the penalty now. And man, talk about having to trust God when you don't know if you can pay rent and like buy groceries. on a regular basis for almost 2 years. This has been going on for a while. I've been trying to make financial amends. I've been making large payments to the IRS, or I was until I couldn't anymore because the money stopped coming in the way it was. Credit cards maxed out, the whole 9 yards, right? For the men in this room, if you want to get real, let's look at your finances, or your sponsor have you look at your finances, right? Like, it's a scary thing. There's a lot of growing for me to do around here, right? And so I'm taking a serious look at that stuff. I'm scared. Here's what's funny. I'm scared to work and I'm scared not to work. I'm screwed, man. Like, I need God so bad, right? And so my morning routine is rigorous. It has to be, because I have to get centered, because I wake up with this untreated alcoholism that is so strong that it literally debilitates me if I don't do something about it. It keeps me from doing the things that I know I should be doing. That's alcoholism to a core. I know I should be out there working, grinding in the heat with my team, but everything in me wants to do the opposite. And so I have to get centered and trust that God is going to provide no matter the circumstances. That's prayer. That's the 11th step right there, baby. I love the 11th step. You can find me praying on a walk for 30, 45 minutes sometimes. And it's not a beautiful prayer. I'm a dummy, really. But I just have this connection with something that's so much bigger than me, that I'm able to tap into, who loves me so dearly and he's just been carrying me this whole time. Like, if you guys were to see the financial picture, it's like, how are you even in a house right now? Right? It's because of God. And so, yeah, of course I want to sponsor other men. Of course I want to carry the message to people that are in rehabs that are like, it's over. I'm done for. There's no hope, right? Talks about it in I'm going to forget the section, but a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Very important word is seemingly. We were all there at one point. And so it's like, we talk about the spiritual malady, and, I'm selfish and self-centered and all this stuff. And I am, right? And we know the solution, right? But why is it that it's so easy for me to just step away from Alcoholics Anonymous? It's probably the most selfish thing I can do, because all I've been asked to do is just carry this thing to the next man. It's the solution. What a weird thing. We got 12 steps. You got to go through the first 11 so you can do the 12th, because the 12th is where it's at. 12th is the actual solution to this thing. If it weren't for the 12th step, none of us would be here. And the cool thing is, like, every single one of us, and every single one of us that came before us, and all the people that came before them, and the people that came before them, all the way back to Bill W. and Dr. Bob, not one person has gone through the steps in the same manner. There is no right way to do this. There's no wrong way to do this. It's just about doing it. It's just about taking the action, right? And that's what I'm super incredibly grateful for, in Alcoholics Anonymous, and just the men that have come before me that are willing to, lay their lives aside to just work with another guy, to just take another guy through the book, knowing that probably about 10% of them are going to stick around, like, at least in the beginning, right? Most of my sponsees aren't with us anymore, and it's a tragedy. But it makes sense to me. I'm not surprised by people that leave. I'm surprised by the people that stick around. I'm even more surprised by the people that come back. Whew. Talk about God, man. What a beautiful thing. That's all I got, guys. Thank you so much for having me out. I really appreciate it.